first lecture that I'm going to give in this course is based on a book written by Friedrich Nietzsche. The book is on approaches to history, and the title of the book is On the Advantage and Disadvantage of History for Life. Now, the first book that has been assigned for this course is titled A Different Mirror by Ronald Takaki. And this book documents the history of immigration, the history of the founding of this country, and then the history of the immigration of different groups into this country and how they settled down, moving up to the 21st century when we are going to become, or we have become, multicultural America. Multicultural means the country is becoming increasingly complex in terms of culture, and we believe, or it is believed, if you look at the census, that as we move further into the 21st century, the country is going to become more diverse, the minority population is going to increase. Now, that book is about history, but not only is it about history also, but the second book, which is on social welfare history, is also about history. So instead of getting into, before getting into anything, instead of giving you some highlights of Ronald Takaki's book, I want to give you a framework of engaging history. If you are going to engage history, you need something like a framework, like a driving direction. Now, my role here is not to tell you which one of these three to take. And actually, when Friedrich Nietzsche wrote the book, if you read it very carefully, he said, if you really want to have a good society, you need to have a balance in these three approaches to history. He didn't believe that just having one approach is going to be good. Each one of them has some strength, but it also has some kind of weaknesses. So what are some of the initial observations he made in this book, and which will help you as you engage this course, social welfare history? First, according to him, history has a significant relevance to humans. And this is so because animals have no historical consciousness. And sometimes I feel it's so interesting that an animal can just sit down. They don't have to think about yesterday. They don't have to think about tomorrow. They're just living just as it is. But we human beings cannot afford to do that. At every particular time, we have to be aware of where we are coming from, where we are now, and most likely where we're heading to. This is something that we human beings have to deal with that. And this is one of the things that Nietzsche was trying to address in this book, and I think it is really very important. Second, humans always struggle with knowledge of the historical past and its meaning. What does he mean by that? When you encounter historical information, whether it is about yourself, about your country, about your ethnic group, about your city, or something like that, you have to wrestle with the idea or the fact that, what am I going to do with this? Or what does it mean to me? It's really very, very important to think about that. And amazingly, two people can go through the same historical information, but depending on how they make meaning out of it, they may decide to go in different directions. So this is really very important, because as you read this course, as you take this course, Social Welfare History, and you begin by reading Ronald Takaki's book, you're going to see quite a lot of information about the historical settlement of different groups, the way Native Americans were treated, the way different people from Europe, different people from Asia, Africa, and Latin America migrated to this country. But what does this mean? So this is something that we have to wrestle with that, and I hope you will bear this in mind. And then lastly, he also said that deep knowledge of history and engaging it comprehensively can overwhelm people. And what does he mean by that? When you engage the whole of history, you embrace it, there are chances that it is going to overwhelm you. And when you are overwhelmed with something, if you are not careful, you are going to be discouraged. Okay, what do I mean by that? What we simply mean by that is, maybe if you study a lot of history, for instance, I have taught Western humanities, and when you study the history of Western civilization from the time of the ancient Greeks to the present, you're going to find out that a lot of terrible things happen, even though good things also happen, okay? So sometimes if you hear everywhere in history something terrible happen, if you are not careful, you can become cynical and just say, well, this is just what it is. There's nothing we can do about it. So we have to be very careful there, because sometimes when we learn things that are very negative, it can influence us, it can overwhelm us. So what is Nietzsche's solution to this? Nietzsche's solution to this, and I would encourage you to take this into consideration when you read this book, these two books where you will read a lot about good things and terrible things that happen in the history of the United States. You have to create a niche, according to him, to make an impact. Niche simply means I cannot change the whole of the United States. I cannot change the whole world. But I can choose a small area and try to make a meaningful difference in that area, whether it is in my neighborhood, whether it is in my city, but create an area where you can make an impact, whether it is in your job or whatever, so that anybody who encounters you will say, yes, I have been inspired by this person, and I am also willing to make a difference in the lives of other people. I think this is a very important recommendation by Nietzsche in terms of not allowing ourselves to be overwhelmed with history and become very cynical. Okay, having said that, now let me begin by talking about the three different approaches to history. The first approach to history is called the monumental approach. And in this monumental approach, to give you a general idea, it is history about active and monumental persons that have performed great things in history. So what does this mean? It means when you're studying history, you just look at people maybe like Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, you're looking at the presidents of the United States or other great rulers in Europe or something like that, okay? So these are monumental figures. Or you're looking at monumental events, great events that happen in history. That's what we mean by monumental history. So when you study this approach to history, for instance, you are just looking at legendary figures. Legendary figures means these leaders that they are just like great men of history. When you see them, you feel like you're moving into some kind of another level of the human experience because of their greatness, okay? And then it is also triumphalist. Triumphalist is from the word triumph. In other words, this approach to history is more interested in the triumphs in human history. It's not interested in failures. If there are failures, you will see that in this kind of approach to history, there's no attempt to really take them very seriously. They are just reduced to the footnotes. So it's just the triumphs of history that are recorded. And then any failures in history are kind of discounted. I have already said that. They are discounted because the approach is just to focus on monumental events. And then there is a tendency for it to revolve around great celebrities. Okay, so imagine today in the United States, if you're going to write history from the point of view of monumental approach, it means wherever the TV cameras tend to be around all these kind of celebrities, right? So it means they are history. Now, we know that there are a lot of other things happening in the United States, but you're not going to hear about those things because the monumental approach to history is just focusing on these great celebrities of life, okay? And then it focuses on symbols of hope and greatness. In other words, when you study history from the monumental approach, you are interested in things the symbols that would give you hope and greatness. One good example I can give you is if you study the history of how the national anthem of the United States came into existence, it was after, I believe, during the War of 1812 when the United States was bombarded and somebody thought that the British have taken over. And then when he woke up in the morning, he saw the American flag just flying and it just inspired him. After all this bombardment in the night, the flag was still just kind of hanging in the morning. So he was inspired by that to go and write the initial national anthem. You see? So this is an example of how monumental history can really inspire you to do something really great. Okay, enough about that. What are the problems with this approach to history? Well, Nietzsche identified some problems that I think we should look at. I'm not summarizing everything, I'm just kind of highlighting some concerns. He said it is ahistorical. They are ahistorical in their comparison of the past and present. They ignore social context in their comparisons. So his argument here is that don't just talk about people's achievement without talking about, for instance, the context of that achievement, okay? Context matters in making judgment. If you don't have a sense of context about what is happening when things happen, you may not be able to really appreciate that. Maybe there are certain things that happened in the past, we may not take it important now because our context is now different. But if you're going to appreciate it, you have to go back to that context and look at what happened. So when you're reading these two history books, I want you to pay attention to this. And then the other critique is also they ignore anything in the past that is not inspiring. So there's danger here. And the danger here is that even in my life, for instance, sometimes I like going back. There are certain things that happen in my life that I didn't like and I feel embarrassed about them. But I do not avoid thinking about them because I try to learn important lessons from there so that I can be inspired to do something really better. So sometimes or often it is not good just to throw away things that happen in our past that are not good. Because if we can study the mistakes we made there, we can try to avoid making similar mistakes. In other words, we're learning lessons from history. And then finally, they ignore the lives of ordinary people and social processes that made the achievement of great people possible. So what does this mean? What this simply means is just that behind every great man of history, and I'm sorry I'm using great man because in this context, that's the kind of language that Nietzsche is using. I'm not trying to be just gender exclusive or something like that. Okay, so whenever history takes place, something monumental, there are always ordinary people that were part of it. Think about the United States, whether it was a struggle for independence, okay, the War of Independence, whether it was the Civil War of the United States. If you read it very carefully, you see the lives of ordinary people. Even women made a huge contribution. The anti-abolitionist movement, you find a lot of ordinary people who participated and contributed when workers were struggling to get their rights. This civil rights movement, all this women rights movement, you see how ordinary people, even though there are great people who led these movements, but they were able to be successful because there were ordinary people who participated in this. So what we are trying to draw your attention to here, based on Nietzsche's critique of monumental history, is that when you are studying these monumental figures in the history, in social welfare history, do not ignore the role that ordinary people have played in supporting them in order to bring this great achievement. Okay, the second approach to history is called antiquarian history, or antiquarian approach to history. According to Nietzsche, the word antiquarian, by the way, is from the word antiquity. Okay, so you're looking at the past. So this type of history is aimed at the preservation and admiration of past antiquities that mark the history or origin of a people, state, country, etc. So in other words, and I'll be frank with you, I am somebody who likes antiquity very, very much, looking back at things that happened in the past. I always like to do that. Sometimes I like traveling to around the United States, visiting museums and things like that, and see how people in the past cope with life. I teach a course in anthropology, and so this has made it even more interesting to me. So this is what antiquarian history is. And to give you an example of how this can be complex, antiquarian history can be complex, it highlights the institutions and traditions of the past that have contributed to making people who they are. And the example I would like to give you here, for instance, is the Confederate flag. Okay? Now, I know people have different reactions or something like that about the Confederate flag. But the point I'm just trying to make here is just that there are some people who like the Confederate flag because it says something about their identity, about some history of their past. Okay? Now, you may have a different opinion about that, but I think it's something that you have to take into consideration. Just like the flag of the United States has a lot of meaning. Okay? It can be very emotional. I know somebody who has a lot of reservation. He would always criticize things happening in the United States. But he said when he visited Ghana and saw the flag, he felt, oh, great in his heart. Okay? So flag, okay, is something that came in history, but it can inspire people. So antiquarian history is looking at things in the past that we can bring into the present that can inspire us. So it forges a sense of community among disparate people. So the United States is made up of people from different social backgrounds or ethnic backgrounds. Even in Europe, do not assume that all Europeans, just because they are from Europe, are all the same. Many of them do not even speak the same language, right? So, but coming into the United States, building an identity around the American Constitution and around the American flag can create a sense of identity that is transcendental. And what I mean by an identity that is transcendental is that this identity is not owned by one single individual, but the whole group can identify with it and feel great. July 4th is another thing that is very, very important in the history of this country that brings us all together, irrespective of our backgrounds, okay? And then it is helpful during times of crisis. It motivates people to serve their motherland because of the emphasis on cultural heritage, okay? Now, just look at what is happening in Ukraine now. There's so much that is discouraging there, but I cannot imagine when you see the way people are being treated there. But because they have this sense of identity that is from the past, they are mobilizing it. Some people go to fight, and they know that they may not come back home alive. Okay, so antiquarian history, bringing something from your past, can inspire you to do something really great now, and that's what antiquarian history is. Okay. Now, it generates pride and psychological satisfaction. Yeah, you feel proud about your identity and things like that because of what happened in the past. Okay? Okay, so this is what antiquarian history really is. before I move to say some critical points about antiquarian history, I want to draw your attention to the fact that some people feel it is a kind of like approach to history which feels there's no way forward without looking at the past. It's almost like saying in order for us to move forward, we have to reenact what happened in the past now. Okay? Now, let's go to the problems of antiquarian history. The desire to venerate everything of the past introduces bias in judging historical past. Because all the desire is to venerate, is to bring glory to what happened in the past. There's a tendency to be biased in history, okay? So, for instance, when we think about the Confederate flag, yes, it is part of some people's identity, but when you look at the details of the history, you just feel like, from a humanitarian point of view, is it by venerating it, are we ignoring how other people under that kind of tradition were treated and things like that, okay? So that's the question of bias. And remember that when Nietzsche is saying this, I'm using the United States as an example, but this can happen to any country in the world, the points I'm trying to make. It can happen in Nigeria, it can happen in South Africa, India, or any other place, okay? Now, antiquarian history also cannot separate the old and the useful. What does this mean? What this simply means is if your goal is always to reenact the past, always about the past, but while it is true that we cannot forget our past, but not everything in our past is inspiring. And we have to come up with a criteria for judging what about our past is going to be useful for us. Okay? For instance, in some parts of African countries, I have seen people, and I know different people have different opinions about this, but in the 21st century, I don't feel comfortable seeing women almost naked or people almost naked dancing. Yes, I know it is their culture, but this is the 21st century, okay? So if you're looking at this from a critique of antiquarian history, we don't deny the fact that it is their heritage and they have the right to do that. But one other way to think about that is to say, what is the aim of the dance, okay? And how, if we understand the goal of that dance, is it to bring people together or to feel nice or whatever? Can we create something new for the 21st century that can enable people to really achieve the goals of that kind of situation instead of just doing that? There are a lot of things in our past that we have to judge that they may not be useful to us today. So that's the point we're trying to make, okay? And then it has pastime orientation. It is primarily concerned with preserving rather than regenerating life. So when I say regenerating, what does that mean? The best way to survive in this world is to continue to regenerate yourself. For those of you who are taking this course, you know very well that even after you get your bachelor's degree, you get your master's degree or whatever, if you get a job, you continue to learn, you continue to regenerate yourself. So the same thing here, the critique of antiquarian history is that because it is just concerned about the past, it tends to ignore the need for regeneration, which is saying that in order for us to live and be successful, we have to constantly regenerate ourselves. And then finally, it paralyzes dynamic people who want to promote human creativity or innovate new ideas and institutions in society. In our society today, we know there are a lot of people who have new ideas. And of course, I'm not saying that every new idea is good or whatever. But the point is that when you have antiquarian historians, they discourage any new innovation because they feel everything about the best of humanity was in the past, not in the future. So for those that believe that there's still something good that can come out in the future, they are discouraged when they are trying to make some innovation and things like that. So that's a critical point that Nietzsche raised about antiquarian history. Okay, now let's go to the last approach to history, which is the critical approach to history. Now, the critical approach to history is the approach to history that emerged in the 19th century. This kind of history developed in the 19th century, and in this case, history is approached from the scientific perspective. Now, I do not have the time to get into the detail of what it means to approach history from the scientific perspective, other than to say, as we shall see, that if you're approaching history from the scientific point of view, you are very rigorous. You are concerned about evidence. You don't allow anything to go as a myth. You just believe it just because it is your tradition or something like that. No. Even you yourself, you have to critique yourself. You have to examine yourself. In other words, when you approach history from a critical perspective, I cannot stand here and just say, yeah, because I say this, that's it. No. Myself too needs to be interrogated, and I have to have the courage to interrogate myself. So the second thing is, this approach to history liberates humans from the past. It teaches people how to criticize the past. You remember, antiquarian history is not good in criticizing the past. Monumental history is not. But critical history is teaching people how to critique the past. There's no past from this approach that is not going to be critically examined. And those of you who are familiar, for instance, with if you study the history of Christianity, you find out that there's something called German criticism, higher criticism. If you look at the way they critique the scriptures, for instance, the Christian scriptures, you'll be very shocked the kind of questions they raised. And that's part of this tradition of critical approach to history. There's nothing that cannot be criticized. Everything needs to be examined. Now, sometimes we may not like it, of course, but that's the way it is. And then C, it is motivated by the desire to make society move forward and make progress. So progress is the most important goal of critical history. Okay? This is also an approach to history that in most cases look at history from the bottom up. So it is kind of like the reverse of monumental history. So while monumental history will be concerned about celebrities or something like that, critical history will look at the lives of ordinary people, those that you don't consider to be important. They will say, these are the people we are going to be concerned about. Okay? There's a book titled People's History of the United States, written by Howard Zinn, where he documents the history of the United States, but from the perspective of these ordinary people that normally we don't study in history. Those are the people that he decided to focus on. So it is the reverse of monumental history. And then it subjects history to trial and condemnation where necessary. So what does that mean? What that simply means is I can love my heritage, I can love my past history or my national history or something like that. We can love the history of the United States, the history of Europe. But from the point of view of critical history, if there's anything that went wrong, we have to have the courage to condemn it. We just have to say it the way it is. Okay, we cannot hide somewhere. So you can see that this is an approach to history that can make many people very uncomfortable. And then it shakes society out of its outdated past and effort to conserve everything in the past. Okay, so sometimes we are trying to conserve everything in the past, but critical history says no, we have to shake everything. And when we shake everything, it is only what remains after the shake that we're going to keep. But we're not going to just continue keeping everything. And you're going to see all these things happening in the history of the United States, the way we struggle with it. Are we going to abandon everything about our heritage, or are we going to shake things up and then select those things that's enduring and then bring them to the present and then move forward? These are all critical questions. And then it deconstructs the myth and illusions that serve as canopy shielding the past. So what does this mean? This simply means that you're trying to say something happened wrong, but you are trying to just hide it. You bring a good canopy to cover something that was terrible. You should just be courageous to say that it was wrong, but no, you are trying to cover it. Critical history will just kind of expose this. And then it undermines beliefs that have that perpetuate injustice. So any belief that is perpetuating injustice, critical history is going to debunk it. Okay? It is going to debunk it, and when it is debunked, some people are not going to feel happy about that. And then it uses life to judge history. What does it mean to use life to judge history? Let me give you an example. It's good to say that we in this country are concerned about happiness, freedom, and the pursuit of liberty and all those kind of things. These are great ideas. But what does it mean if somebody now at this moment hasn't had breakfast and they don't know where they're going to get lunch in the richest country in the world? You see, here we're talking about existence. So we're using human existence to judge those ideals. It's not going to make all of us comfortable, but it is true. I have had breakfast before this, but is it everybody in this country that has had breakfast? Or is it everybody that is guaranteed to have lunch today? Okay, so here we're using existence to judge those ideals, and this is what critical history does. And then this kind of history requires courage among human beings because it is tough and dangerous in practice. It is dangerous in practice because you do not know where the criticism is going to stop. Okay, you do not know where the criticism is going to stop. People can continue to ask very critical questions that you wonder, okay, where is this thing going to stop? There was one person who was asked, what is her religion? Her name is Sheila. She said her religion is Shiism. Okay? So, that's it. So where is it going to stop? Some people are very concerned about that. Okay? And then everything can be subjected to critical assessment. Our thoughts, our motives. So, and then let me just very quickly to the last point, because I want to go through the criticism so that I don't take too much time. Great historical figures are deconstructed and rendered to be ordinary human folks that experience normal human struggles like everyone else. So let me give you an example here to illustrate what this point is all about. There was a time I was watching the public television broadcasting, PBS, Public Broadcasting Service. And then I saw this documentary by National Geographic about George Washington. Now, if you watch the documentary, by the time I watched it, I was so amazed. It was so critical. By the time you finish watching, you just feel like, well, this is just an ordinary human being, just like any one of us. So I went on Amazon.com quickly to check what is the review of that documentary. And I remember reading where somebody said, so what is left? What is left now? Because after he watched it, he feels like there's anything special about George Washington, okay? So this is what we mean by deconstruction. And this is an area that some people are very concerned about. That the way critical history operates, sometimes it can go so deep that at the end of the day, there's nothing left because everything is just kind of flat, okay? So what are the problems with this approach to history? Humans develop a high degree of skepticism and see everything in society as contingent. So how can you have values here that are enduring? Because everything is contingent. Okay? Now I understand there are contingencies. We do not know how the economy is going to move or something like that. But can we live a meaningful life without some sense of certain values or ideas that are enduring? That's a question I want you to ask yourself. Second, all human assertions become relativized. So relativism becomes everything. So every time you say something, you have to be, well, that's just your opinion, or that's just what they said, or something like that, okay? And then third, humans become exposed to too much history and become overwhelmed and confused, okay? So here, Nietzsche is saying that when you take this critical history approach or critical approach to history, you can be overwhelmed with history. And when you become overwhelmed with history, you are probably going to become, if you are not lucky, very cynical. Very cynical because you've just seen things just happening everywhere or whatever. So you become cynical. You become kind of discouraged because you're overwhelmed by that, okay? And because everything is contextualized, people become less confident of what to say or believe. Uncertainty predominates the human mindset. So what does this mean? Here, what Nietzsche is trying to tell us is that in the past, when people did not have this kind of consciousness that we have from critical history, they may know very little, but they are very confident. And they can do quite a lot with that little thing, okay? But in our age, we know so much. But because of this kind of contextualization, relativization, and all those kind of things, we end up doing very little. Because even though we know very much, we're not sure. We're always feeling cynical or something here and there that we're not sure about, okay? And then humans begin to lack confidence in their conviction and what to do, okay? So for us to accomplish something, we have to have some conviction. But the problem here is that when we have this conviction, maybe our conviction is the exact thing that is leading to someone's operation and all those kind of things. So you see, sometimes we become just kind of unsure of what to do. And so Nietzsche is very concerned that too much of critical history can just lead us to a situation where we are confused in spite of its advantages. And then finally, he said, as the outside world becomes complex, people withdraw into their inner self and cocoon. They feel reluctant to participate actively in public sphere. So what does this mean? What this simply means is just that when we encounter this kind of history, there's a way in which we feel like, oh my God, there's just so much out there that I'm not sure. I'm not going to say anything because I'm not sure that if I say something, somebody here is not going to say that either I am a racist or I am this and that. So I'll just keep quiet. I'll not say anything. So people withdraw. And when they withdraw, if every one of us is going to be withdrawing from the public sphere, who is going to run the country? How are we going to shape the country if this is really happening? Okay? So I think this is a very important point. And then people become spectators when they withdraw. They become spectators because they are not willing to participate. They are afraid they are going to probably be perceived this or that, or they may say something that will be perceived this way or that way. And the human suffering and oppression become ordinary. No story can easily move people. What does this mean? Under critical history sometimes, because we are so overwhelmed with history, if something terrible like they shoot 10 or 20 people in some other place, well, we hear it today, but somebody would hear it and just continue their normal business. Okay? It's just normal. What can I do about it? So I'll just continue my normal life. Okay? So Nietzsche is very, very concerned about that. And then they judge history from the perspective of their age. They neutralize all myth and legendary stories that can inspire people. So what does this mean? Look, in every culture, there are certain myths, whether you like it or not. Myths are very important in human existence. Even if those things are not necessarily really true, you cannot go to the laboratory and prove them, or you cannot go to the museum and prove them or something like that. But yet, myth can still inspire people. But critical history destroys all that. And when all that is destroyed, then there's nothing to inspire people. So it becomes then a problem. And then finally, people see themselves as the latecomers of history. They are at the end of history. Okay? So this is a brief overview of Nietzsche's three approaches to history. As you can see, each one of them has advantages and disadvantages. And Nietzsche said that if we really want to have a coherent and steady society, we need a balance among all these three approaches to history. So when you are reading Ronald Takaki's book, A Different Mirror, and when you are reading the assigned text for social welfare history, you are going to come across many different things about American history. And I want you to use this as a framework. What part of this history is monumental? What part of it is antiquarian? And what part of it is critical? And what do we do in order to balance this so that we can create a more steady, coherent, fair, and just society for everyone? Thank you very much.